Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to the Reliability Matters podcast, where we focus on the people, processes, and equipment that ensure reliable circuit assembly and manufacturing performance. I'm Mike Konrad, and today we're diving into a topic that keeps many executives awake at night: ERP implementations. More specifically, why so many of them fail, and perhaps more importantly, how to fix them midstream before they derail your operations. Joining me today is someone who knows this space inside and out, Chintan Sutaria. Chintan grew up working in an EMS business from a young age, gaining firsthand experience in the unique challenges of our industry. His career path took him into the world of business process consulting at some of the largest Big Five firms, and he has since worked with numerous EMS companies on a wide range of projects. Many of you may recognize Chintan as the founder and former CEO of CalcuQuote, a well-known supply chain management software solution for the EMS industry. Recently, he founded OpenJar, a consultancy dedicated to helping electronics manufacturers navigate complex business challenges, including ERP implementations. We'll discuss his new company, as well as his recent blog post entitled "Why Your ERP Implementation Failed and How to Fix It Midstream." And we'll also explore common pitfalls and uncover strategies to steer your ERP project back on course. Whether you're just setting up an ERP journey or knee-deep in one that's not going to plan, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's jump in.
Welcome to Reliability Matters, a podcast for the electronic assembly industry. Each episode covers topics related to reliability, best practices, and environmentally responsible assembly techniques, with insights from experts across the electronic assembly industry. Now, here's your host, Mike Konrad.
Hey, Chintan, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Mike.
It's been a while.
It sure has. Yeah.
So,
no, thanks.
A little bit has changed since we've met before. Last time you were running another company, and now you've departed that and started on a new venture. Tell me about the new venture. Tell me about OpenJar and how'd that happen.
Yeah. So with my previous company, CalcuQuote, we had sold the business and it was scaling really well. I had a really good team that was supporting me. So basically, I felt like it was in good hands, whether I was there or not anymore. And what I loved about the early days of CalcuQuote was being able to be in front of customers, solve problems, really be out there as the front line. And as CalcuQuote grew as a business, I realized that my passion is being in front of customers. And so that's how I departed CalcuQuote and started working on this new concept, OpenJar, which basically lets me do what I love most, which is, be in front of an EMS company.
Yeah. Where did the name OpenJar come from? I'm always interested. Now, CalcuQuote, I got that name, right? That made perfect sense for what you did. OpenJar, I guess you can pivot all over the place and have the company name still work. You know, you're not pigeonholed into one specific specialty. But tell me where that name came from.
Yeah, so it's kind of a personal inspiration story for me, at least. So I had spent in my 20s, I spent a year doing volunteer work in rural India. And I had this mentor there who, when I talked to him about the experience, the way he kind of described it is a lot of people do these types of experiences and then they put it in a jar and put it on the shelf. And it's like a nice thing to look at every once in a while, but then you kind of forget the impact it had on you, right? You go about your life from there forward. And so he always had this thing of like, yeah, don't put it in a pickle jar, like incorporate it into your life. And in CalcuQuote, we had this thing where every year since we started the business, we would give to charity. And in this one, I'm kind of making that a core part of what I want to do is make sure that I'm thinking about, positive experiences, creating a good community around whatever business venture I have. So hence OpenJar.
I love that story and I love the name. It's a similar philosophy of something I learned a long time ago. I hired a consultant who was a little bit out there in terms of ideas, and only from the perspective of, she was beyond my comfort zone, right? And she would come up with these wild suggestions for the company, and And my first reaction was, this is nuts. This is totally crazy. What am I doing with this person? But she taught me one important lesson, and that was where you say, put it in the jar. Mine was, put it on a shelf. Take the idea, consider the possibility, put it on a shelf. Don't throw it away.
Yeah.
And and days, weeks, months, sometimes years later, I would go through that shelf and go, oh my God, this makes perfect sense. This wasn't crazy. It was me that was crazy. This is actually a really sound idea. And every idea that I agreed somewhat reluctantly to just put on a shelf and just let it ferment, let it age a little bit. Let me mature into that idea, right? And it every time it worked. So I love that. I'm really identifying with the concept of OpenJar, and it applies to so many different things. And tell me more about what OpenJar. Sorry.
I was going to say, in product development, there's this idea of iceboxing ideas. So somebody comes up with a new feature idea and you say, I'll put it in the icebox and let's see if it's still warm after a week or two. Then we can revisit it again. So
exactly.
Same concept.
It's all a part of consider the possibility, right? Rather than just, sounds crazy, throw it away. What does OpenJar do specifically?
Yeah. So I'd say there's two parts to it. One is being in front of customers, helping them solve problems in whatever space they're in, right? So ranging from, the topic for today, we're talking about ERP implementations. But I think back to this concept of OpenJar, all of these experiences blend together. So I like to think about problems more holistically. So whether it's defining a strategy for go-to-market, or looking at how your technical systems and processes can be improved, to training and getting better organization structure, kind of all of those things are wrapped together. That's one side of the business. There's a second side of the business, which is I call it the scumworks of new product ideas. So that's the behind the scenes part for now, right? So I'm operating a little bit in stealth mode on some ideas that I have in the back of my head that have been there as, I've encountered problems that EMS companies face, because there's, of course, the services side of it where I want to be in front of customers and helping them directly solve problems. But a lot of these things are also, if you build a software package or if you build an innovation that can be scaled to the industry, that's beneficial for everybody. And so I like both elements of it, creating products as well as working directly with customers. So two parts to the business.
So you recently wrote a blog, which is what caught my attention, entitled Why Your ERP Implementation Failed and How to Fix It in Midstream. What inspired you to tackle the subject, and is ERP failure a common scenario that you encounter?
Yeah. So I'll start with, is it a common scenario? And I would say yes. And I'll go back to, I started my career in consulting. So I worked for Deloitte, Ernst & Young, working on SAP implementations. And it's funny because whenever I tell people that, everybody usually groans and says, I remember this company that had to do an SAP implementation. And I couldn't agree more, right? Those things take forever. There was, I won't name names, but there is a company in this industry that was doing an SAP implementation when I graduated college. And by the time I started CalcuQuote, they were still in that SAP implementation, which is a long time.
It's perpetual motion there, right? They've invented perpetual motion. Never stops.
Yeah, I think by the time they went live with it, it was like a 20-year project, right? And so that's SAP. But when you get into smaller EMS companies, right, mid-sized EMS companies, even those take forever. So I constantly am hearing about these stories of companies that say, we're in the implementation phase of our ERP, and you ask them every 6 months and they're like, yeah, we're almost there. And you ask them 6 months later, like, oh, we delayed it a few times, but we're going to get there soon. And it just keeps happening, right? So I think it's a very common thing to have delayed implementations, to have it go wrong, to switch to a new one and then say, this isn't a better world for us, and we're going to switch back to what we had. Happens more often than it should. And the reason I say that is because it's extremely costly to do an ERP implementation. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, even for smaller companies, because if you factor in the time it takes to train, the time it takes to get the licenses all set up with the server configuration, all of that stuff, to vet various different options for ERPs, build custom solutions on top of it to make your existing processes not break, all of these different things, it adds up quite a bit. So, yeah, I think it happens quite a bit. What inspired the blog post is having seen it happen over and over again. And the way I kind of describe it is, if you're doing such a big thing, it helps to bring in somebody who has been there before, if for no other reason than to have a second opinion or to anticipate problems that you might be encountering for the first time. Because if you haven't gone through it, if it's not your day to day to look at ERP implementations, there are decisions that you make that you don't understand the implication of that decision until 6, 12, maybe 6, 12 months, or maybe even 2, 3 years later. And that's when it comes back to bite you really hard. So I'm a big believer in, if nothing else, just ask for a second opinion. It doesn't cost you really anything to say, hey, is this the way others in the industry have done it?
Right.
And that's a good way to approach it. And it doesn't have to be from a consultant. I'm not, here shilling for consulting services. I would say it's, ask other companies that use that ERP system and say, like, hey, what do you wish that you did differently? Because we're in the same space and I could learn from you.
So just to be clear, OpenJar is a consultancy more than a provider of ERP systems, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're aware of all the platforms out there. You know how to use them. You know which ones are more suitable for specific applications and scale and things like that. So, okay.
Yeah. Not providing an ERP directly myself, more like if you're on that journey, if there's anything I can do to help make sure you avoid some pitfalls, happy to participate in that.
Yeah.
There is, I will say, there is like some common themes regardless of ERP system that you choose, right? So I think there's some common pitfalls that people make where they start to think about, I'll give you one example is when they're looking at ERP evaluation, they start to prioritize, well, my old system could do this and I really needed to do this, instead of thinking, well, maybe there's a reason I'm switching from my old system and I should think about why I'm switching instead.
Right.
So there's those types of issues that people fail to consider when they're switching that are just, hindsight 2020, it seems like common sense, but in the moment you kind of forget why you started on the journey.
Well, it's a good segue. In your experience, what's the most common misconception that companies have going into ERP implementation? I'll tell you one. I'll admit one. When you said it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, that I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. From my perspective, that's crazy, and I don't even know if I'm going to put that one on a shelf. That may not make it to a shelf.
Absolutely. And it's not that you're, here's where I think people fail to understand the scope of the cost to that point, right? Is it's not that you're paying someone $100,000 to do a service for you. So it never shows up as an expense item. It's the operations of your business suffering temporarily during that process, right? So usually an ERP implementation involves some key people in your business that understand the processes, that are decision makers. So they're the senior level people in your business that are also usually instrumental in the running of the business and the servicing of customers and all that stuff. So you factor in their salaries and the distraction that they're experiencing to not be able to do their day jobs to work on this project. Now all of a sudden it's several people's salaries potentially, right? Then you add in now I have to train the entire company. Well, that becomes an expense. And then whenever you get into a new system, you're usually, in the beginning, there's a learning curve. So you're less efficient at the same processes that you were using before. Even if it's, a matter of a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever it is, but there is a learning curve. So that productivity loss for that period, if you consider the entire labor of a factory, like that can be an expensive endeavor. So that's where it all adds up is all those little things that are hidden costs that you didn't consider in the scope.
Yeah. You talk about fixing ERP implementations midstream. Why do you think companies hesitate to course correct once an ERP project starts to derail? Are they just so focused, and so invested in the outcome that they don't want to change anything, or what's I guess I'm not asking you to break down their mindset, but what are some of the common explanations for the resistance to course correct?
Yeah. So here's my take, and it varies business to business, right? So this is it's a generalization, but there's always an exception to the rule kind of thing. Is if it's if you start on a path like this and you've set aside a budget and you've understood all, just to initiate the change of an ERP. My old colleague, who's now the CEO of CalcuQuote, David Sharp, he used to say, you know, switching ERPs is like deciding to cut off your own arm to get out from under a rock, right? Like it's a big decision. Once you've made that decision, you don't get to halfway sawing off your arm and say, you know what, I'm going to back off of this. You usually want to go all the way through. So I think that's one part of it. Is you don't want to abandon the progress you're making because you kind of feel like the light's at the end of, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The second thing I think is that the way a implementation team gets structured makes a huge impact on what is the success criteria of the project. And so I'm a big believer in there should be layers to an implementation team. There should be an executive level steering committee that says like, we understand the goals of what we're trying to do. We understand the big picture, and we're going to make sure we stay on track and stay true to that original mission of the project, right? And that has to be somehow a separate hat. If it's a small business, it could be the same person wearing multiple hats, but that has to be a different hat that you wear compared to the implementation person who's in the project management role. They're trying to coordinate between departments because you can totally get lost in the weeds and forget why you're making some of these decisions. So in any implementation, you're going to make compromises along the way, but somebody has to be looking at the big picture and say, wait, that compromise actually, that breaks the whole business case that we started with. So what are we doing here? And those kinds of decisions are really hard to make if you're in implementation mode versus in executive thinking mode.
Yeah, it's a little matter. I guess it's quite has a lot to do with perspective. Whether you're at a 30,000 foot view or a 3 foot view, like you said, in the weeds. Sometimes you just need some elevation, right, to see over the horizon as far as you can.
And I think a lot of business owners also start, and it's changing. It's not as common as it used to be, but treating an ERP implementation as an IT project, right? Like it's not an IT project. It's fundamentally changing how your business operates. It's at best it's a CEO level project, but at least it's an operations level project, right? So if you don't treat it that way, then you can definitely get lost in the weeds much faster.
Sure. You outlined several reasons why ERP implementations fail. Which one do you see as the biggest contributor to failure? Poor planning, lack of executive buy-in, or something else?
I'd say it's maybe something else. And here's how I kind of think of it, right? Is every business out there, and I primarily work with EMS companies. EMS companies usually have something in their DNA that makes them unique from other EMS companies, right? It's not like every single EMS company is the same. There's always something unique about them. And to me, finding what is that unique thing that your customers choose you for, that's what you got to figure out, right? And if it's because, hey, I'm super responsive to customers, well, then you got to build responsiveness into your ERP decision making. If you say, I am the lowest cost, then you say, okay, well, I got to make efficient processes, even if they're less flexible, right? If it's that I can handle complex traceability that my competitors can't, well, then you got to make sure that's a requirement. So it's understanding what makes you different and using that as a part of the ERP steering level. Because if you don't do that, then you're basically following a template of an ERP that doesn't make you any different. It doesn't play to your strengths. That becomes a huge problem.
How important is change management in ERP implementation? What are some of the pitfalls organizations face in this specific area?
Yeah. So when we talk about ERP implementation cycles, I think that like training, getting users on board is probably the most substantial part of that. Because configuring an ERP system, like most of these nowadays, are pretty straightforward. Doing a data migration, hopefully you already have an ERP that you're migrating from. So it's just mapping data structures. That can be done in a matter of maybe a week or two, right? that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting everybody on board to understand what the new world looks like. So yes, change management, absolutely critical. And I would say especially critical in EMS because a lot of EMS companies, and I can speak to this from my experience having built software for EMS companies, right, is a lot of EMS companies aren't technology forward in software, right? They make the most advanced electronics in the world, but they do it using software systems from like 20
Yeah.
years ago, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And so training users is so challenging. I distinctly remember this experience in CalcuQuote. It's a web-based application, right? You go to your browser and it works. And we didn't prioritize enough training in the early days. This is, the first year we were in business, and we had a user from one of our first customers call and say, "Hey, it's not installed. I got a new computer. It's not installed on my computer." I was like, "What do you mean? There's no installation? It's
It's
it
not.
should just
It's not on your computer, right? Right.
yeah." So this person starts arguing with me that like, "Hey, if you can't install it, then we're gonna have to cancel using it because you're not installing it for me." So I go visit this customer physically. I go there. I'm standing next to this person, and I'm like, "Show me where it used to be installed." And it was really just the favorites bar on the browsing, right? I was like, "Oh, that's what you meant." Now, that's a level of training that I hadn't even considered that I would have to teach somebody how to use a browser. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and we're all guilty of presuming things, right? And sometimes we're just presuming facts not in evidence, right? We just assume that they will know it's web-based. But I guess to the credit of whoever they used before, it was so good. I mean, they didn't even realize it wasn't on their computer, right? I guess that's a compliment. What are the first warning signs of an ERP system that's going off the rails? Are there basically red flag leaders that one should watch out for early on?
So in one of the first ERP implementations I did in this space, we had put together like a do not say list. Like these are things that you can't say in meetings, right? So like an example was, well, that's how we used to do it. It's like, well, that's not a reason for talking about the future. Like
that's right. That's right up there with you can't say bomb on an airplane, right? I mean, there's certain contextual things you got to, situational awareness you have to be around.
Yes, exactly. But those types of phrases where you're trying to relive the past, those become dangerous because they basically start to turn whatever new system you're going to adopt into like a square peg round hole situation where new system has different capabilities. It's a different system, and you're trying to make it match the old world that you're used to. Well, it's not about the old world. You're necessarily going to have to change processes. So I think those types of phrases are a red flag. The other one that I think is kind of a red flag is when people stop showing interest in the project, meaning, well, I've got this other deadline, so I'm going to skip the meeting today. Is there anything important I need to know? Or you know what, like we're having a really busy week. Let's not work on the ERP this week, because it's one of those, if you start to lose that momentum, then it's really hard to pick it back up again because your business starts to change. The documentation of what you've done so far becomes outdated or forgotten. So I think that's a big problem, is if you don't maintain momentum, it can become problematic.
Yeah, you mentioned the word change. How do you balance the tension, and I assume there's quite a bit of tension, between sticking to an initial ERP plan and being flexible enough to make adjustments midstream? I would imagine that you're both a consultant and a therapist at that point, right? But have you been in that position where there's a resistance to change?
Oh yeah, I would say consultant, therapist, personal trainer, right? Like there's all kinds of
dietitian
in there. Yes. Yeah, it's the way I kind of think about it is like you're necessarily going to have to make compromises, right? I forgot what the exact saying is, but it's like plans don't survive contact with the enemy or something, right? It's kind of the same thing when you go into an actual implementation cycle, and when you get to cutover and go live, it's like, oh well, we thought it was going to do this, but we missed that, and that's a problem. It's like, okay, well, we just have to maintain positivity and adapt. So the way I kind of think of it is, you should expect that there will be a problem, and that way, when there's a problem, you're not surprised, right? If you plan for perfection, but expect imperfection, then that's the best way to go, because you lower the bar of your expectation, and usually that gives you a cool head on how to respond to it. Because there's definitely cases I'd worked on. This was back in my SAP days, but we had done an implementation where basically to start the cutover process, the program that was going to start it like bugged out in the first like launch, and we were like, oh no, like we have several thousand employees that will show up to work on Monday morning and not have work instructions. That's a huge problem. And expecting problems are going to happen, keeping a cool head about it helped us like correct it. And we got it corrected within the first 10, 15 minutes of the cutover cycle. But otherwise, you could tell the people who were going through this for the first time, because their hair lights on fire immediately, right? And they stop taking it as like, okay, well, what are we going to do about this problem? Let's figure it out. And instead they're like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to abandon this? And how are we going to shift it to another weekend? It's like,
I told them this wasn't going to work, right? Yeah, you get all the pile-on effect. Well, some wise person once told me many years ago, make peace with the worst, right? Don't accept the worst, but make peace with the worst. Come up with a plan. Understand the worst may happen. And will it kill you? Well, no. Will it be inconvenient? Yeah, but will it kill me? No. Okay. Make peace with the worst and move forward. That way you don't have that deer in the headlights, paralyzing effect, and all the naysayers pile on and all of that. Just expect, I just expect it's a journey, and there's going to be potholes and detours and things like that, right? I mean, that's just the way it is, particularly in your world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also something to be said for ruthless prioritization, right? Where if
I like that term.
If you get because if you get in front of and this happens inevitably, right? You get to go live and someone says, I forgot to mention in one of the 24 meetings we have, but there's this report that I rely on and I don't have it in the new system. And I'm like, well, you know what? If you forgot it for the last 3 months, it's probably not like mission critical today. Right. Yes, we need to get it for you for sure. But like, do we need to light our hair on fire to do it? Or is it more like, I need it by the end of the month, right? So those types of things are, and it's uncomfortable because sometimes people go like, well, it's really important to me to have this function. It's like, well, if it never came up in the last 6 months or 3 months or however long it's been, it's not urgent. It is important. It's just not urgent. And so that's where with the prioritization, it's like, well, the priority on day one after an implementation is, can I ship product? Can I enter new orders? Can I, move through the production floor? Like those types of things are very fundamental things that the business can't operate without. Okay, I don't have automated banking in my new ERP system. Okay, we'll deal with that tomorrow. Right? Like
that's a tomorrow problem. That's not a today problem, right?
Exactly. So,
like a central nervous system in a human body that touches pretty much every part of the body, ERP touches, pretty much every part of a business. How do you ensure that midstream fixes don't create disruptions across, various parts of the business? Is it possible to kind of surgically isolate these midstream fixes and recalibrations and things like that?
Yeah. So I think in this, I've seen several companies kind of go through this, where as they go through the process of implementing ERP, they start to develop this way of thinking in a process-oriented, structured way, right? So if you say, hey, we're going to have to adjust how we do part numbering, then they start to develop this skill. It's like a muscle that you build, where you say, well, if I make that change, it has this impact and this impact and this impact. And they start to process that really well. And so I would say with midstream changes, you don't want to make it without thinking through it. But you also don't want to be paralyzed from making changes. So I would say there's a balance to be struck there. That's where experience really helps, right? Having somebody that knows what they're doing, that says, I've seen this before. And if you do that, you're going to end up regretting that change. So let's not mess with the thing that we've already decided on. So that's an important thing. The other thing I would say is when you're going through that implementation, inevitably you will have to make compromises, right? Like, I don't think it's an appropriate behavior to say, we decided this 3 months ago and that's the way it is. In light of new evidence, it doesn't matter. Like, we're going to stick to our guns, right? So if you're willing to be flexible as you gain more information, that's really important, because otherwise you end up, building for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, given how resource intensive ERP implementations can be, what advice do you give to companies to minimize the financial and operational risks during course corrections?
Yeah. So again, it varies based on the size of the company, right? A 20-person EMS company is going to have very different considerations than a 500-person EMS company, right? So there's scale to consider there. And then if you have 5,000 people, that's a completely different order of magnitude. But I'll start on the smaller side, which is, I would say, don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? Usually, if you've picked a good ERP company that fits with your business type, then probably they've designed their software to account for best practices, right? So if you say, well, I like to create purchase orders like this, but this system forces me to do it differently. It's like, well, is it you like to do it like that, or is that a strategic differentiator for your business? Because if it's a differentiator, like, okay, we got to make that work. But if it's just a preference thing, well, you're going to have to learn to get over that and do it a new way.
Build a bridge, get over it, right? Right.
Yes, because there's a reason that the system does it that way. And even if you don't feel like you've gotten to get a better process out of it, somebody else in the company, like if you look at it holistically, somebody else benefited by conforming to best practices. So there is this discomfort of, some jobs become harder and some jobs become easier. So the whole company overall, when you implement an ERP system, should, if it's done right, become more efficient. But inevitably, there is, some department head or some SME or somebody who says, my job became harder and that's not fair. And it's like, yes, but by making your job just 5% harder, we were able to make everybody else's job 50% easier.
Yeah.
So
thanks for taking one for the team.
Yeah, exactly. And the easiest example of that is especially if they didn't operate in a very structured ERP world before, and you put an ERP in, it's the order entry or the BOM entry where somebody will say, I used to just be able to throw an email over the fence and production would just handle it. And now you're telling me I have to put in a sales order and schedule a work order. I don't understand why I have to deal with all that. And it's like, well, when you do that, we can run an MRP. We can have the production floor know what the schedule is. We can plan in advance for a second shift if we need to. Like, there's all these other benefits, but you don't want to fill out an order entry form. Well, sorry, you're going to have to do that now. So that becomes a tough conversation.
What makes OpenJar's approach to ERP implementation or midstream corrections, for that matter, different from other consultants or other firms in this space?
So I'll say two things on that. One is that I'm a big believer in a structured approach. I think in frameworks, and maybe that's because I started my career working in like large consulting companies where everything is a framework, right? There's an approach, there's a matrix, there's a diagram for something, for everything that you deal with. And so because of that framework-oriented thinking, I like to have a structured approach to whatever implementation path we're going with, because it makes it easy to understand. So I think that's one differentiator. But candidly, I would say ultimately it's going to come down to the person you work with, and sometimes it's a personality match, right? If you like working with me, well, that's a good fit. If you don't like working with me, that's not a good fit. It doesn't matter the amount of experience or the specialty or whatever it is. It really has to be, because as you said before, right, it's your therapist, your personal trainer, and
right.
It's all in. So there has to be an alignment in the working style. If you don't get there, then it doesn't matter. So I would say what differentiates me is it's me versus somebody else. And really, you have to interview the person.
Do you think the rise of more agile cloud-based ERP systems has changed the failure rate or nature of ERP implementations? Have they reduced the risk of failure, or is it still the same?
I don't know that it's well, okay. I'll say the more agile approach of ERP systems, I think, has lowered the barrier to entry, right? So more companies can get an ERP system today than they could 10 years ago and 20 years ago, right? Because it's significantly less expensive in terms of custom development and all the little switches you have to figure out how to configure behind the scenes. Like all of that stuff has gotten easier. So the barrier to entry is lower. But as a result, because the barrier to entry is lower, you also have, let's say, less sophistication in the decision-making process and the implementation team to actually do the implementation. So I do see a lot of times where companies will say, how hard can it be? I can do it over a weekend. And you're like,
Be aware of any client that leads a conversation with how hard could it be? Because that usually followed by how little can I pay you? Right?
Yeah, which that's the natural inclination. And I'm pretty upfront about it, where I'm like, look, like if you don't see value in it, then you shouldn't do it, right? Like that's I'm not here to squeeze money out of your pockets. It's got to be valuable for you. And so the way I kind of describe it is, you have to set appropriate expectations. Otherwise, there is going to be a higher failure rate. And unfortunately, the ease of new software is so attractive that people forget that this is still a business operations project that spans, all departments, will have sweeping implications to how you do customer service and sales and operations and all of it. So yeah, just because the software looks easy and pretty doesn't mean that it's going to be easy and pretty always to implement.
The EMS industry is filled with various size companies, from tier 1, 2, 3 EMS companies to little mom and pop, literally, one old reflow oven and manual pick and place machine or something. Is there an average size, maybe based on revenue or based on production lines, where an ERP system starts to make sense? I would imagine if you're a startup and you're one person with a soldering iron in your garage, you're not going to invest in an ERP system. But at what point do you think it starts to make sense? And has that threshold for making sense lowered over the years? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I have a strong opinion about this, which is don't implement a system like this until you have to. So if
you
you're
can live without it, live without it, right?
Exactly. Because if you're so small that, for example, if you're getting an order a week, you could probably manage that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not rocket science to manage. If you have 5 employees, you could probably just, say like, hey, go work on that order instead. The customers call it, right? Like that's easy enough to manage. I think sometimes people get ahead of themselves and think, well, I got to have this reporting. And it's like, well, the report consists of 4 rows of data for the month. So like, how meaningful was it to get it in a report versus just to look at the production floor and see what jobs people are working on, right? So I would definitely say there is a minimum threshold where, until you have to. Now, the other shifting dynamic in this industry is because I grew up in this space, from the 90s where you did have I had uncles and aunts that were just, a small room rented and yet a soldering iron, and that was the EMS business, right? And nowadays, I would say the barrier to entry to get into the EMS space is much higher than it used to be, because most companies that are buying from US-based EMS companies are requiring things like traceability and fine pitch component placement and what's your ISO certification and all of these little things that add overhead. And so there is a minimum threshold to be able to survive as an EMS company, and that threshold continues to get higher. So I think unfortunately, I think the super small companies that have sustained as like a family business for a long time, it's going to be at some point we'll get to a threshold where it's up or out. You're either going to scale the business and it's going to be viable, or you're going to have a really hard time making ends meet as customers push more and more requirements to you, or move to a company that can meet those requirements.
Right.
So, I would say the barrier to use the ERP system continues to get lower only because customer requirements are lower, but you still have to balance that with delay it as much as possible.
Sure. And I've had people on the show, I've had guests on the show that talk about U.S. manufacturing versus overseas manufacturing, and how a lot of the strategy in the U.S. is to rely more on automation, because automation tools cost pretty much the same all over the world. Labor is really a deciding factor, and if we can minimize labor and have more automation, then it's never going to be a level playing field, but it becomes closer to a level playing field. And but the great thing about automation is, you do reduce labor costs. The hard thing about automation is there's a tremendous barrier to entry because it's expensive, and not just for the acquisition, but the training and all of that. I mean, it's a higher level. You have maybe fewer employees, but they're higher level employees as well. So I think that's, to your point, if you're a mom and pop with, a soldering iron and a dishwasher, in your garage, it's going to be difficult to make, to buy, $2 million SMT line, because your customers are demanding the best, 3D X-ray, the best CT scanners, all those different things. Final question, Chintan, if you had to give one piece of advice to an executive team, so you're sitting in a Shark Tank environment, right, and they're quizzing you, and you had to give advice about how to start an ERP implementation, what would it be?
I would say a successful ERP implementation. If you're thinking about starting it, the first thing I do this even in conversations with customers as a preliminary check to like screen, is I'll ask, what's your strategy as a business? Like, tell me what your value proposition is. Tell me why your customers choose you. Tell me what you choose not to do because that's not your core business. What kind of business do you turn away? Because if you don't understand that, you're going to have a really hard time making decisions as you get into the implementation, because you will have to make compromises, but you don't want to compromise away from your root business. And so for an executive level audience, I would say you have to have clarity of what is your strategy, of what you choose to do and what you choose to say no to as a result. And if you can't articulate that, you're going to have a hard time making decisions.
Yeah. Well, I think one good decision that should be made early on is to work with a consultant that knows what they're talking about, and shepherd their way through the journey. And it doesn't seem easy, and it can be a daunting project. And I think it's a wise idea to work with someone that has basically brought people up Everest, before, right? You want a Sherpa. You definitely want a Sherpa that knows the best route, knows which way to go, which way to avoid, what time the weather changes, as that applies to your world. You've been up the mountain a few times, so that does make a lot of sense.
Well, and I think there's varying degrees of that too. So it can be, you can have the Sherpa that walks up the mountain alongside you to make sure you get there, or it could just be somebody who says, I've got a map you can use. Why don't you start there, right? And companies have different internal capabilities. So I always say, like, you got to figure out what's for you the right thing to do. But yes, at least ask for a map.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Well, to my audience that would like to get more information on OpenJar, if you are watching this on YouTube, look down here where it says see more, and you'll see information on how to find OpenJar, as well as their URL and email address and all the relevant information. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, that same information will be on your podcast app. Just when it's safe to do so, just go to the show notes section on your podcast app, and that information will be there. Chintan Sutaria, thanks again for being my guest. You were my guest when you were with CalcuQuote, and I'm happy to have a serial entrepreneur as a revolving guest. So I wish you all the best of success in this new venture. Again, I love the company name and the meaning behind it. And I'll look forward to tracking your progress, and maybe in a year or two or three, we'll talk again. If you're not starting something new, we'll see where you are and what the industry thinks of what you have to offer.
Sounds good, Mike. Always a pleasure to join you, and I love the podcast. So thanks for having me.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's good to see you. Well, that is another episode. Thanks for listening to or watching the Reliability Matters podcast. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Reliability Matters on your favorite podcast app. If you're watching this podcast on the Reliability Matters YouTube channel, be sure and give us a like and subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. We release new episodes on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month. And a very special thanks to the Printed Circuit Engineering Association's PCB Chat at pcbchat.com and Ascendo Reliability at reliability.fm for syndicating this show. Thanks also for your questions and episode suggestions. Please keep them coming. I love to hear from you. Send comments or episode suggestions to Mike at mikekonrad.com. Just remember that's Konrad spelled with a K. To learn more about the podcast, please visit our website at reliabilitymatterspodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening or watching. Until next time, keep learning, keep doing it right, and remember, reliability matters. I'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening to the Reliability Matters podcast. Join us on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month for new episodes of Reliability Matters.